Recommending approval for the jail video management system at about $750,000. And the treasurer's office redesign, you may recall that was originally around $350,000. General Services took a closer look at it and was able to bring that down to $100,000. HR has asked for an increase in the liability insurance appropriation. This is an estimate from Gesture Insurance of about 12.9% increase in the cost of insurance. Postage, both the Sheriff's Office and the Treasurer's Office are projecting about an 8% increase in the postage rate. We would go ahead and fund that. In the case of the Sheriff's Office, they're able to pass that expenditure through and collect that through service of civil paper revenues. So that's basically a net of zero there. Public Works had asked for 2 positions for water resources. They are able to offset that by reducing some other appropriation within their budget, so recommending approval of that contingent upon that other appropriation being reduced accordingly.
So what were they able to, how did they offset those 2 FTEs?
Right, through weed eradication program, they used to perform
Great.
some services for the city of Des Moines.
And is that ongoing, or is this going to be a permanent positions that they're adding?
Be permanent, and permanent
Okay.
reduction in the weed eradication and reallocating it to these water
Deb,
resources.
I just got a quick question, and it's just a general question. So, here's my overall general concern. Because I know that your office gives targets to every office under the Board of Supervisors as well as elected officials' offices.
Correct.
And I have a lot of confidence in those targets that you put out based on the revenues that we have available to fund those targets. But consistently, since I've been here, 2 departments come in over target every year. The Sheriff's Office and Conservation. Every single year, those 2 departments come in over target.
Mm-hmm.
So, end of the day, if those are all approved over the targets that they were supplied, I'll just vote no on the entire budget. So, I mean, I don't really have a lot more to say about it. I don't think there's any debate about it. And I really don't know that I need to have you tell me what these departments do. If I don't know what they do after 22 years, then I probably haven't been paying much attention. So I think I'll just be good, but that's going to be my position on if they're on target, I'm good with the budget. If they're over target, then I'm not.
Okay.
Okay?
We'll go ahead and continue for those that are interested in the budget process, so.
And just so you know too, as a part of this budget, Deb and I worked really hard, given House File 718, having that impact on General Fund 1. We made a really conscious effort of limiting the expenses in Fund 1, and you'll notice here as Deb works through this, the majority of decision packages are not being recommended.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you've got to want to show up and attend budget meetings and actually pay attention and listen to people make their case about the budget, and that's what this process is about. And I have no sympathy for somebody that wants to not attend meetings and then get up and leave because they're mad we're going over budget recommendations. So let's move forward and go through the budget as we had planned.
The remaining 2 bullet points on this slide are law enforcement supplies at a cost of $66,000. That was tactical vest and rifles. And then the treasurer overtime of $425,000. We did look at where she is currently at in her budget for the current fiscal year. This puts her right in line with what she's actually expending. The remaining decision packages, we did some modification to what was being requested. For Global Neighbors, recommending that we pause staffing efforts there. So at this point in time, not adding the 2 FTEs requested, or 3 requested by Community Family Youth Services and the 1 requested by General Services. Community Family Youth Services asked for an increase of about $142,000 for shelter, and that was for putting people up in hotels. We do see that expenditure is occurring, but recommending that be paid for from ERA 2 funds instead of from an increased appropriation from the General Basic Fund. Wesley Life rate increase of $57,000 for food for seniors, recommending that be paid for through reallocating from a different line item within Community Family Youth Services budget. there's some areas there that we typically underspend, and I think we could appropriately reallocate to cover this cost.
Does that come out of reserves in the general basic, or what?
It would just be reducing a budgeted amount in the general basic fund and putting it instead towards this. So just moving it from one budget to a different budget within community family use services, all within the general basic fund.
Okay,
CFYS had essentially absorbed that within their existing allocation.
Yes, what Frank said. Conservation, the rental revenue, they asked to have the expenditures and the rental revenue that they receive for some properties that they lease to AmeriCorps and Conservation Corps, and also for crops. They would like that moved into their conservation special fund. We're fine with that, so contingent upon the expenditures associated with those properties be moved into that special fund as well. And then a couple staffing requests, really, we need HR to weigh in on these. The senior natural resources technician position, they wanted to upgrade that from I think a 9 to a 10. We need to hear what HR has to say about that. Same thing with the 5 customer service assistants that were requested by the treasurer's office. Sleepy Hollow loan, a net request of $815,000.
hang on a minute.
Yep.
The 5 customer service assistants, did that go through the comp study? I'm looking
I
at Josie
belie-
too, no, she's shaking her head no. And what were you gonna say,
I
Deb?
was saying the title, the customer service assistant, that went through, the position itself went through comp study, I believe, but not, as far as I know, of whether or not they need to increase by 5 FTEs.
Got it.
Sleepy Hollow, we're fine with that, as long as we enter into some written terms about how that loan would be repaid once the time comes. For an accountant, you may recall that the health department asked to have a position added because they are no longer farming out their billing to a third party, and they're bringing that function in-house. The recommendation would be, let's maybe take a broader look at this county-wide. Is there any merit, efficiency to be gained by centralizing some of these accounting functions within the central accounting division?
Say that again?
So rather than putting this new position in health department, let's think about whether it might make sense to put it within the accounting division up in the auditor's office. So this person could then serve as an accountant for several departments. It's just a discussion, an idea to toss around whether we could achieve efficiencies in that way.
So the health department out on 19 and Carpenter need an accountant, so we're thinking about having one countywide?
This position put into the auditor's office.
So not necessarily countywide, so the idea is in our discussions with central accounting and also with some turnover, we've identified a lot of problems with accounting in other areas. So centralize some of those services. Central accounting has more resources. So health would have a dedicated accountant, but then under Joe Ellen's
I believe we
department,
tried that once
they would have
before
other
in the
clerks.
past, and it didn't go over too big, years ago.
It's kind of case by case, so there's certain, like the sheriff's office, for instance, would be too heavy of a lift, but I think there are certain areas in health department that I identified as one of them that made
I'd
business
have to
sense.
really think about it.
So was
Do
this
that.
adding the accountant would have been a full-time FTE at Health Services?
Health department.
Health department, Helen,
At,
or
at,
not
at,
Helen.
at the Health Department?
We were paying for the services to a third party anyway,
Oh,
so
okay.
the net impact is zero. It would just create the position to be a
So-
full county.
So they were using a vendor for for the accounting?
Yes.
At the health, okay.
That's why they want an accountant?
Would this save them money by onboarding a person as opposed to using a vendor?
They had reduced expenses to offset the entire cost, so it was a net zero impact, right?
Right, they were
So
paying
it's
80.
just a matter of where we put them?
Correct.
Okay. Well, that's good.
IT asked for an increase in their software and maintenance line item to keep up with the inflationary cost of subscriptions. And they wanted that to be applied for both 24-25 and for 25-26. The recommendation here would be to, in the final amendment for the current year, go ahead and right-size that appropriation to whatever is needed at that point in time. And for the next year, to appropriate the increase of $442,000, but perhaps reduce that by being able to phase out some subscriptions that are no longer needed. So we're working with IT to see if there's some software that we could eliminate to achieve some savings in this area. And then the final request on this decision, on this slide, is for the armored vehicle to pay for that out of the existing vehicle replacement appropriation. So no net increase in total vehicle expenditure.
A couple slides ago, that's the business surgeon packages, we were talking about the 518,000 for the culvert and conservation for the storm cleanup.
Correct.
And we're waiting for both insurance and FEMA. Do we know when we're gonna hear about those? Like,
Ris-
my concern is this: if we give the money, do we have less chance of getting the coverage? Or should we hold
So-
on that to see where that sorts itself out?
So risk management is waiting to get back to us on the insurance. So as soon as we know that number, we do have to give the money upfront for FEMA because that works on a reimbursement only.
Okay.
But it will be less, but they haven't even given us an approximate amount of what insurance will cost. But I would think we would know that this week.
Okay, thank you.
Rich has something to say about it.
Yeah.
And actually, we just had a meeting with FEMA this, apologies, Rich Leopold, Conservation. Our staff had a meeting with FEMA this morning while I was here. So I don't know what the outcome of the meeting is, but I know that we're actively pursuing this, so I should know what is that.
Good.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
The following decision packages would be disapproved through the recommendations, the extra help adjustments and the inflationary adjustments requested by Conservation. They had requested $235,000 for that. County Attorney had requested $72,000 for publications and continuing legal education adjustments. And they had also requested $32,000 to expand the Victim Offender Dialogue Program and $132,000 for a social worker. Some other ideas to reduce the county's contribution to emergency management to the amount required by the 28E agreement, be a savings of about $579,000. And then we need to take a look at actual versus budgeted expenditures across the counties, across all the departments and offices in the county. Are there places where we're over appropriating what is actually being spent? So just kind of to right size appropriations as a whole.
Excuse me, Deb, so what are we doing with emergency management as it relates to this 2080 agreement? Because I need to understand how that works. We have a 2080 agreement, we're overfunding the 2080 agreement today?
So that, yes, the 28E agreement requires us to pay 50 cents per capita for the unincorporated Polk County residents. It's a cost of about $14,000. In
Okay.
addition to that, we pay some
Okay,
staffing cost.
and that agreement has been enforced for a while, the 2080 agreement, then with,
Yeah, so it looked like it ran about every 3 years. It opens back up 25, 26, so the timing is good for us to direct emergency management to talk to all the 2080 partners to discuss what that per capita is so that it can be spread out
Got it.
evenly, and then circle back to see, what Polk County should be paying in
Okay.
addition to right now, what would be $14,000.
okay.
So so you're saying reduce the emergency management, isn't that staff?
Yes, that's staffing costs.
So while we've got the federal government talking about getting rid of FEMA, we're talking about getting rid of emergency management.
No, we're saying that through the 2080s, all the partners that receive equal services should pay an equal amount, and Polk County shouldn't have the burden of 90% of their staffing costs.
Well, to me, this is like, another elections have consequences. I think in his, and I can't find it right now, but I'm sure AJ said, when he was sick that day, but Dutch had said they're getting ready to do a funding analysis on the 2080. So I don't know when if we were to even
Come on
think
up,
about doing
guys.
this.
Let's hear what you have to say about this 2080 agreement. Is it up for renewal, or is it just a rolling 2080 agreement?
Good afternoon, AJ Mon, Emergency Management. I think there's two things going on here.
Okay.
There's been no increase in that 50% assessment for over a decade. And so that's, I think that's issue one. So I want to make sure that I'm answering your questions.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions on it? The other municipalities also pay the same.
Okay,
Have you had any conversations with them about increasing that amount?
Yes, and I think you guys, County brought up that the assessment has been discussed at the last, since December, so the last 3 executive committee meetings that it's been discussed. And so the executive committee is prepared to make a recommendation to adjust that assessment countywide or to all.
so it would be spread evenly then across the jurisdictions?
Yes, and for the 20.
Okay,
But this cut is massively outside the 2080 scope.
it is.
Is it because you're in year 2 of a 3-year contract, or is it because this isn't what you guys have talked about?
There's 2 separate things. The 2080 agreement, we're in year 2.
Right.
of that agreement.
Okay.
The total amount generated with that 2080 agreement is approximately $246,000 countywide. That's the entirety of that 2080 agreement.
246?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then what's this, where's this cut coming from?
To be honest with you, sir, I saw this 2 hours ago.
Okay,
So I'm still kind of reeling from this,
Oh.
but I know that that number represents the remaining of personnel costs for 4 positions. So this, if this proposal would be enacted on, it would fundamentally
Wipe out 4
wipe out
staff?
our-
Yeah.
So this wouldn't be absorbed by the renegotiated part of the 2080 agreement?
Yeah, I can't speak for all the jurisdictions because we still have a year left on the current agreement, even after the petition was termed. So, again, if this proposal would be enacted, the commission is considering approval of its budget next Wednesday. And so seeing this number at any time is pretty devastating. Seeing this number right now, 7 days before, we've already had multiple executive committee meetings. We've already presented this in at least 3 public forums. It's been published. We have a notice of public hearing that is advertised for next Wednesday when the commission would be considering its entire budget. This would be almost exactly half total commission that would be within 7 days of the commission has to consider approval of the budget.
Well, I won't be supporting this cut.
Yeah, I understand that you're within that 2 of the 3 years. Then my question would be because we're in the middle of renegotiating, so can you have that conversation with your board as far as, while we're doing this? I get where that doesn't sound like it'll work for this year because you're in the middle of it, but could this work for the following year if that's the direction the board can go?
Well, I think too, each of the 20E partners have to approve it too at their level, right? So this
Right.
isn't going to be something that just happens overnight.
right.
But it's worthy of starting the conversation, especially if you're having the budget for this year and talking about what it's gonna look like next year. I mean, we're in the correct point, perhaps 1 year ahead.
So we have 18 months before the current agreement would expire in its current status. So that would be that 18 months, yes, we would have that time.
But this budget coincides with year 3, right? So it coincides, we're talking about the same thing. This is a 25-26 budget, and that's when this opens up, so they're directly correlated. And as far as any
Oh, 25, 26.
budget
okay.
deliberations you have with the emergency management, I would think you would want to coincide it with this board's budget if you're going to be asking for what's actually more, $800,000 in county dollars that go towards emergency management. And if you say that the cut is outside the bounds of it, then isn't funding it outside the bounds of it?
So we have had a very cooperative relationship between the Emergency Management Commission and the Board of Supervisors for 20-plus years, participated in the budget discussions, And our goal, my goal as the director, was to not have any surprises, to have those discussions with all of the municipalities across Polk County and with Polk County. I believe we've done that in good faith for 20 years. We participated in the budget discussions this year, met all of the budget targets that were presented to us. In fact, have saved money in a couple different places in the commission's budget. And so getting this number, which represents 50% of our total budget, a week before the commission is considering approval of their budget, would have a massive impact. And yes, those impacts would start on July 1st through June 30th of 2026. I understand that. I understand how the fiscal years line up. And that it also coincides with the expiration of the current 2080 agreement. Those are facts. But the impact is, I mean, it's pretty clear that there will be 4 of us on July 1st that probably are not going to be there.
What other departments are being cut? Is it only AJ's?
We've looked at different reductions throughout, and we're continuing to do that. I think that this is important for emergency management, who is a commission, is in a county department, and who has a great deal of other municipalities that are using the same services that we are. And I think it's unfair to put the entire burden on Polk County all the time to fund an operation. And so I don't see why it's unreasonable to direct emergency management to discuss with all their partners that are receiving the same services we are, to say, hey, you need to pay in at a greater amount so that it's more equal. Of course, there's a great relationship when we're funding it $800,000. Why
They
shouldn't?
do great work.
Well, that's not the point. It's that the Johnstons and the Urbandales and everyone else who's receiving services aren't paying nearly what
Oh,
Polk
and
County
we don't want to
is.
go down that road, because we provide services for a lot of people when it comes to public service, conservation. So I don't want to go down that road.
But we've gone down that road, and what you
Yeah,
and I have
and
even
we,
talked
and
about
we have
is.
paid a lot of money for all those services. So you are singling out emergency management. Now, I am not gonna support this cut of $579,000. I don't think anybody on this board should, because next time we have a tornado or a flood or any other disaster, the first people we call is emergency management, especially when we know our federal government is falling apart. Now, if you wanna have those conversations with every other jurisdiction, and hopefully they can pony up, that's great, and we'll adjust our budget then. But not until then can we talk about any cuts in your department. When we see what they're gonna do, these other 28E agreements, that's great. I've often thought, why are we paying for hazmat? I think it's silly that it comes out of our budget. But it has been that way for the last 20 years, ever since I've been here. It is because we are Polk County government, and we have 17 other jurisdictions that we take care of. That's the way it is. Just like mental health, just like public service, conservation, you name it, that's what we do. So I have no problem with it. Just start working on your strategy, trying to see if other people will pony up. That would be great. Don't you sit on the Polk County Commission now?
I do.
So there's the voice that you need to be telling them to pony up.
So,
And-
can I have some clarification about this process? Because today I understood that it's, granted, an hour and a half late, but just a deliberation, and that
Yes.
there'd be further, like, we're not voting today.
No,
And so what we're doing is saying, with all of these things, these are
Recommendations.
options to discuss. And you and I sat upstairs and talked about the fact that Polk County was funding an exorbitant amount of this, and perhaps not at the right level. Like, it sounds like this is something, yes, as the representative, I'll come back to the board and say, hey, we've had this conversation, strangely more heated than I thought it would be, about, as we're going through the negotiations of the contract, let's look at making sure that we're right-sized.
yeah, and I think definitely, let's have these conversations as it relates to our other communities that are partners in emergency management, willing to look inside their own budgets for additional revenue to support emergency management so that we can spread the cost across across the entire region. And let's look for other examples of where this has been done and worked by other counties and emergency management systems. So, yeah, this is something we need to discuss, and no decisions are going to be made today about any of this. And I think it is healthy to have these discussions.
Yeah, just a little anxiety though for you, though, seeing it so early, so quickly, being that you're certifying next week. I mean, I do tend to agree with Angela on the need to do, either way, we were gonna do a budget amendment probably later on. We're gonna do a budget amendment to lower based on the new 28E, or we're gonna do a budget amendment to add in the salaries of the 4 employees that fall victim to the inability of the 28E to cover all their expenses. So, I mean, I think the conversation starts today. Frank, you'll work on it. I think we all agree we're not cutting 4 positions, right, in EMS? Emergency management, we're asking our partners to pony up, so it's just how we're gonna, politically, I think it might be, or I guess, from the municipalities, from the city's perspective and our partners, it's gonna be a little more palatable that they're not being forced into doing this, but there's a discussion about paying more. And I think that's the concern that Angela's saying and what you're saying, and kind of what I'm agreeing as a former mayor is, let's maybe approach this collectively and collaboratively and do a budget amendment to reduce this once the 20E is in place with the redesigned fee structure.
The reality is we have $11.5 million in decision packages submitted to us, and we have $2 million roughly in new revenue. That is the reality, and I appreciate Frank coming forward with these suggestions as ideas of where to look, and I think we've got to figure this out, and we've got to look at everything and have to figure out how to do this. But no decision's going to be made today.
So the remaining parts that I need in order to move forward with the budget certification, any input that you have on the recommendations that have been presented today, any other ideas you might have. We also need to see where salary and benefits are going to come out based upon union negotiations and for the non-bargaining employees as well. And also keeping an eye on legislation, whatever's happening up at the State House, anything that impacts property taxes will have to be factored in to the best of our ability moving forward. With the recommendations that Frank and I put together, we would be in the general basic fund, Fund 1, increasing ongoing expenditures by $400,000 and potentially another $300,000 pending HR review of those position requests.
What are those position requests again?
It was the 5 customer service assistants and then the 1 upgrade.
Okay,
1.9 million in one-time expenditure increase based upon decision packages. That is primarily the advancing of the 500,000 for the conservation storm cleanup, and the remainder would be for capital improvements. And then it's be an increase of 3 FTE positions. Those were all budget neutral. It was the water resources, the 2 water resources people, and the accountant that were offset by savings from other parts of the budget.
the accountant that is being recommended to go to central accounting,
To consider, yes, consider where the position should be placed.
whatever.
Yeah, all of this is for consideration only, but Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, this would be historically one of the least impacted years in Fund 1. So again, a real effort given 718 to be fiscally responsible, to not cut services, but then also provide an opportunity for this board to consider a tax levy reduction.
To summarize the impact of the recommendations on the other funds, an increase of about $200,000 potentially in the other funds, again, for those customer service assistants, it's just be their benefits would be the impact in the other funds. $100,000 increase for one-time money, that's for the law enforcement supplies. and then the $800,000 loan to Sleepy Hollow. In total, the levy rate would have a proposed reduction of 10 cents. And the new levy rates would be $6.71 for urban properties and $11.11 for rural properties. Then I wanted to point out for you property tax mailing that goes out and how that would look based upon the way that the Iowa Department of Management has set up this form. The mailing, this first slide shows you what will actually go out. I've added the red highlighting and highlighting to show you the impact here. They assume that a property receives a 10% increase in assessed valuation for this fiscal year that will be coming up. Because of that, a house that is valued at $100,000 would be valued at $110,000 next year. So the levy rate, the amount of taxes that they would be paying would go up purely based upon that, regardless of whether or not you increase the levy rate. In addition, the rollback, the residential rollback, homes are now will be paying on a greater percentage of their assessed valuation. Instead of paying 46% of their assessed valuation, they would pay 47% of their assessed valuation. The impact of assuming a 10% increase in assessed valuation and the change in the rollback calculates at an increase of 11.46% in the tax rate, in the tax bill, despite the fact that we're reducing the levy rate by 10 cents.
So they're not gonna see anything. I mean, it's like a smoke and mirrors. It's a joke.
This notice is going to look like an increase in their tax liability,
Exactly.
despite the fact that the levy rate is decreasing and that it's not a reassessment year.
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed, this is the dumbest mailing I've ever seen in my life, and it absolutely will confuse the public to the point where they all are gonna believe that regardless of what we're doing, that we're giving them a tax increase, even though we're not. And it's just, I mean, to me, it's just, this is probably one of the most counterproductive things we could do, and we're being mandated to do it by the Iowa legislature.
So we're being mandated to do this, but could we opt into including a better like,
Explanation.
with it? To
That's
talk to Jamie?
that's what I said, can we add a better explanation to say, don't look here, this is really what you need to be looking at. I don't know whether that's something, I think we could research it. I mean, we're paying for the mailing, so I don't understand why they would prohibit us from having a second page with kind of an explanation aspect, and maybe even maybe we could even have we could push them towards our website as well, that could have a QR code to explain this in layman's terms, so that people could see what the real impact is on their tax bill.
Well, this number doesn't change.
No,
So I mean, we have to send it out, which is stupid in itself that we have to send this piece of paper out, but the number's still not gonna change.
no, the number won't change, but how we explain it will. And, that's where we get into drilling down into explaining the assumption is the 110, right?
Correct.
So that's what's throwing it off.
Yes, and the rollback. So yeah, the next slide here, I showed you, what if those two factors were not in play here? What if we did not assume an increase in 10% in the assessed value,
That's
and the
it.
rollback stayed the same? Then they would see a 0.1% decrease in their tax bill.
A 1%
Decrease.
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 It's ludicrous.
So it shows 12, but this is the net effect, it's a 1% decrease. And that's what they need to see.
Wow.
So I think we need to get creative how we explain this to the public. I really do. I think it'd be a mistake on our part not to.
I mean, you can all say, oh, we're doing a tax levy reduction. Well, they're gonna see this and say, no, you're not.
Right.
We could do more. Then they'd see a negative change.
So the remainder of our budget process, I hear that we still want to have quite a bit of discussion going forward. We would have, on the 25th, we need to publish the resolution authorizing publication of the maximum tax dollars. And then on the 25th, we would have the public budget forum that evening. That previously was scheduled for the 20th, so if you'd seen the 20th before, that the 25th is the correct time now. On March 5th is our deadline to file that slide I just showed you, to file that with Iowa Department of Management so they can send out the report or the letter, the mailings to all the taxpayers. Once we file that report with the Iowa Department of Management, we cannot increase our levy rate going forward. We can continue to discuss any other changes, but we can't increase the levy rate once we file that with the state. March 15th, homeowners and other property owners would expect to receive their mailing that we just went over. And then on the 25th, we would hold a public hearing to discuss that mailing. From that point forward, we move forward with certifying the budget. All that would be wrapped up by the end of April. We're required to have it finalized by April 30th.
So Deb, the resolution is set the public hearing, and then we're gonna have the, forum. We're already gonna know everything. You need to have everything done by the 25th. Is that what you want? So, is that right?
We're setting the maximum, so we could still change. We could make adjustments as needed afterwards.
It's not ideal. So, I mean, well, if we're having a public forum, it's set. We're just gonna tell them what we're doing?
No. Well, repeat the question for me?
She needs her information for the public hearing on the 25th, so we can tell her what we're doing, which is, you know, negotiations, personnel, all that, and if we're agreeing to all this stuff. So our public forum, we're already knowing what our budget is.
No, so the 25th, it just authorizes the publication of the tax levy, but.
Well, that
we're not
tax
s-
levy is
We're not
a lot of
certifying
this.
the budget till later.
Well, we never certify the budget till a long time later. But we already know pretty much what we're saying in the budget. She's gotta have the information on what are we doing.
Our public budget forum is on February 25th, though.
Yep. Deb, when do you want the information on, our information on personnel and any of these decisions? When do you want it?
I'm doing the math in my head.
Okay,
So I would say by mid-March is the last time I can change anything. Up until that point in time, I can change anything except the levy rate, a levy rate increase.
okay.
And, you know, the other thing we have to be cognizant of, we have no idea if anything's gonna pop legislatively still. I read Amy Campbell's report, and it looks like they're going slow and looking for maybe changes next year as opposed to this year, which is good, because everybody's in the same boat out here trying to get to certification of a budget by the deadline, and we're not gonna have time to adjust this once the legislature takes action. Okay, well, this was fun. Let's do this again. I think that will conclude our budget deliberations for the day.